Welcome to the Blue Collar Startup podcast, where hard work meets big ideas. This is your home for real talk, real stories, and real strategies from the front lines of life and the business of the trades. I'm one of your hosts, Mike Nelson from Five Towers Media.
And I'm your co-host, Derek Foster, Dago Cleaning Systems. How we
Yeah,
doing,
you
Mike?
are. I'm good, man. I'm good. How are you?
Good, doing well.
Kicking the new year off. Let's see. When we just recorded, was it on Thursday we recorded?
Yeah, we started New Year's Day. Started the year off right.
We did, so we are starting. Super excited. We got a note yesterday that a new sponsor coming on board, which is just an amazing way to start off the year. So just a little extra note here in for Curtis Lumber coming on as one of our new sponsors. Super excited about that. Very grateful for that
Yeah.
relationship and for the support that they're giving us. So yeah, hell of a way to start off the new year. I know I'm digging in, man. I don't know about you guys, but I'm definitely digging into the actions that we've got to take here, trying to get some work done, man. Trying to get some work done.
One thing
So,
at a time.
yeah,
Small steps.
yeah. And you know what's interesting? You say that too. One of the, and I know it's a little bit of a side tangent, but like one of the things I typically do, and this goes back to Andy Frisella's critical task list that we've talked about before. And I have a tendency to start, every day at the end of my day, I create tomorrow's task list. And I have the tendency to like put on the first five things and then start to add a bunch of other things I got to get done. And so, like every day, I roll into this list that I'm never going to accomplish. And one thing I've focused on the last, what are we, 7 days, 6 days in? The last 6 days, one thing I've been doing is making myself only put the five in and focusing on one day at a time. So, like, I'm just going to focus on these five. And if I have time for other things, great. But it's interesting of try making myself do less, quote unquote, which is helping me do more. So it's I don't know, interesting little science experiment, I guess.
No, that's awesome. And Bill, do you do the same thing with your schedule?
So funny you ask, as you were saying that, I've got a list app, and we were talking about phones before we kicked off, and I'm kind of sick of the phone, but the list app on the phone is pretty good. So you can kind of put your 4 or 5 for today, and you can look out beyond today, which I'm a big fan of. So, it's one thing to do today's list or tomorrow's list, but I tend to look way down the road, almost to a detriment sometimes. So having that list where you can put them in different days out into the future helps me settle my mind because I've got this stuff that I'm saying, hey, by like Thursday this, and then by Sunday that, and then next Monday. So I can drop those 5 things in each of the days. And then as they get closer, I can edit, move, or reposition if need be. But yeah, super powerful.
Love it, love it, love it. As you guys probably figured out by now, today's episode is a Let's Ask Bill, otherwise known as the Business Lab. We've got some new formats we're rolling out this year. We've got the Let's Ask Bill. We've got some Catamount roundtables coming up where we're going to be sitting down, touching on different subjects for business in the trades with a team from Catamount Consulting. We've also doing some women in the trades with guest host Stacy Spector from Catamount Consulting coming up as well. And then last but not least, we've got the interviews from the field, which is kind of that standard interview that we've been doing for years now, where we're bringing in people that are in the field every day, all day, whether they're the business owner or support staff, team members, and talking to them about their roles and what they're seeing out there. So really excited about some of these new episode formats. And of course, don't forget, folks, we're going to be doing our normal episode about 30 to 40 minutes here with Bill today. And then we're going to be jumping over for about 15 to 20 minutes to our Patreon side of things. If you're not familiar with that, we fired up a Patreon account a couple months ago. We're putting a lot of special content in there. It is behind a paywall, $5 huge a month to get a bunch of extra content. But specifically, we're trying to make sure that content is focused around growing and scaling your business and overcoming obstacles and structure and all the fun things that business owners deal with every single day. So if you are considering a leap into business ownership or you are in business ownership in the trades and looking for some help there, that is what the Patreon account is for. Link will be in the show notes, of course. So please check it out. Please join up. Again, it's not so D and I can drive Mercedes Benzes. I don't think we would if we could. It's more about being able to help grow the show and get more help to the people out there that need it. So please jump in. And of course, speaking of supporting the show, and I mentioned our newest sponsor, Curtis Lumber, a little bit ago, but we got a lot of sponsorship opportunities for people that are interested, again, this is not just to help support the show, but it's also to help support young people in the trades or coming into the trades. We donate a lot of that money, at least half of it anyway, to kids that are going to BOCES programs and HVCC, what we like to call the blue collar college, and giving them money for tools and tuition. So if you're interested in helping us support them, please reach out to us. You can hit us through the website or send an email to us, which will be in the show notes as well. So, and of course, shout out to our current sponsors, not just Curtis Lumber, but also People's, Martin Electric, MLB Construction, Bonaccio Construction, Michaels Group, Catamount Consulting, Northeast Construction Trades Workforce Coalition, Pam and Doug over there. Love those guys. And of course, Derek's team over at Daigle Cleaning Systems and my team over at Five Towers Media. Let's introduce our guest. Not that he needs any introduction at this point. You're becoming a bit of a regular. Bill Tansey from the OpEx shop. What's up, Bill?
Hey guys, appreciate coming back, and we'll see if we get enough followership or watchmanship on this. I guess we got a few more scheduled too, right?
Yeah, we got a few coming up for sure. I will say, Bill, I was looking at the stats the other day, pulling some metrics together for Derek, and your episodes are definitely in the top tier of listened to and watched episodes. So,
Good to hear.
not that we've got a Joe Rogan size audience or even close to that, but we do have a lot of people listening to the show, downloading the show, viewing the show, and yours are always in the top. So people must love the information.
Yeah, well, this is a good warm up for me. Joe did reach out, and I'm waiting to hear from Sean. But as soon as I'm scheduled with those guys, I'll keep you posted. But in the meantime, this Blue Collar podcast is a great warm up for me.
Yeah,
Love it.
I was like Joe and Sean, like, oh, Joe Rogan and Sean Ryan. Yeah, remember when you're on that show to just mention us a little bit here. We could use the help from their audience.
Yeah, you bet. You'll be at the top of my list for sure.
So let's introduce our topic for today. So, we've been discussing a little bit in the last few episodes about org charts. And I think we mentioned on the last episode a little bit about functional accountabilities, which, functional accountabilities is a term that I've stolen from Bill, or that he's given me, I should say it, and doing some work with him over the last few months. So we're going to be talking about org charts, what they are, potential uses, similar to what we talked about last week, but then really getting into some of Bill's thoughts on them and how to use them for your business and what they can do for you. So, Bill, why don't you start us off and just kind of give us your definition of what an org chart is?
Yeah, appreciate it. So hopefully nobody's reaching to click this thing off now that they heard org chart, because I feel like that comes with a lot of baggage. So hang in there, guys. Give it.
Well, the good news,
seconds.
Bill, is on our New Year's Day episode, we started touching on this subject, and I think it's a good segue into hearing what you have to say on it. And although it's kind of dry, it is extremely important. So hang in there.
Yeah, hang in there, guys. It is hard to make it exciting, but it's certainly impactful when applied correctly. So, what is an org chart? An organization chart is the simplest communication tool that I know of to communicate how your organization is structured, something we call organization design, in support of your organization's goals. So as we look at the org chart, we should see a collection of standard roles, not people. And those standard roles should be organized in a way and visualized in the org chart that it supports your goals. And those goals are, the goals for the upcoming year, the goals for the next 6 months, 3 years, et cetera. We can talk more about that, but it's organizing the people to drive the success or the vision that you have for the organization.
Love it. I got to say, guys, as we get into this and for our listeners, there is one aspect of my business personally that has been such a challenge for me over the years and still continues to be a challenge. But one of the tools that has been the most helpful recently in trying to figure this out is my org chart. So I'm excited about digging into this some more and hopefully learning a little bit more about it. So, Bill, one of the questions that we have for you as far as org charts go is, should your organizational chart be representative of your current state or what you're trying to grow into next? Hey, everybody, just taking a quick break to talk to you about one of our sponsors, Curtis Lumber. Curtis Lumber is the professional's choice for home improvement. From windows and doors, roofing and siding, decks and building packages to floors and more, trust the pros at Curtis Lumber for expert advice and daily delivery. For locations, visit curtislumber.com. That's curtislumber.com. Bill, one of the questions that we have for you as far as org charts go is, should your organizational chart be representative of your current state or what you're trying to grow into next?
Yeah, and that's something that's always challenging. As we start to visualize anything in the organization, whether it's org charts or other tools, if you don't make the explicit decision with the people in the room, whether or not you're going to do current state or future state, it immediately becomes muddy, confusing, and you're kind of destined for less than success. So the short answer is I like to look at the organization design in total, including the org chart, standard roles, functional accountabilities, some of the things I think we want to talk about on this podcast. I like to look at those and document them so that they represent the current state today, and they have some considerations for the future state of only 1 year out, right? So in essence, if we think of the org chart, there's a bunch of things that we visualize on the org chart, but one of them is current state org versus 1 year out. And I simply change the color of the boxes or the standard roles on the org chart based on that timeline. So there may be one color for current W-2 employees, one color for example, 1099 employees, or not employees, but 1099 contractors. There might be one color for outsourced partners, and then maybe a fourth color for any roles that are going to be filled at some point in the future.
Interesting. I don't think I knew that actually. And that's very helpful too, because I know as I'm looking at some of the growth that we're looking down the road 3 and 5 years, I've been looking at my org chart and going like, I don't even know what I'm going to need here, but let's just make something up. Right? Like, I don't know. I think I might need this person down the road, but you're saying don't do that. Just look at it, what it's going to look like next year.
Yeah. So, this is the time of year when I'm kind of wrapping up strategy deployment for the clients I work with. So that's annual and 3-year strategy deployment. And as we're wrapping up strategy deployment, we're saying, okay, now we have our strategy we're about to deploy for the next 365 days. So for 2026, for example, right now it's January 2026. So let's go revisit our organization design and make sure that the way we designed our organization still supports us today and by the end of the year. And that's the only gap that we want to bridge with regard to the org design. Then we revisit it years after. And as we dive into this, one of the things that makes that possible is developing standard roles in the organization. So we should probably talk about that, because if you don't have standard roles, it's really hard to scale. And then you run into all sorts of problems, as you're saying, like trying to think out into the future without standard roles, like almost impossible. It's hard to scale when you get to the future if you don't have standard roles, because your organization design kind of doesn't make sense. It doesn't work anymore. So one of the presuppositions to a successful org chart is the understanding, development, and use of what we call standard roles. And on other podcasts, we've talked about standard work. You can't have standard work if you don't have standard roles first, for example, right? So I think it's important. Maybe we want to dive into that just briefly and talk about standard roles and how they become the components that are visualized on the organization chart.
Yeah, I definitely think we should do that. But before we do, though, I just wanted to back up 1 second, because it's interesting. A thought that occurred to me is like one of the things that Derek and I talked in our last episode was about the need to be revisiting things like your org chart. Let's use the word occasionally. But this kind of sounds like it really is something that we should be at least looking to make changes to every year based on the type of growth that we want to achieve or anticipate. Is that fair? Or
Yeah. As we talk about anything strategy related, right? And again, if we're aligning an organization, if we're aligning a group of people to support our business strategy, this is all strategy, if you will, adjacent stuff in my mind. So as we talk about anything strategy related, it's my belief that if you do a good job of it at the beginning of the year, you should probably check in halfway through the year just to be sure and to recommunicate and reinforce but it really shouldn't change throughout that year. And I will say I've been part of organizations and I've supported organizations that use the word entrepreneurship as a surrogate or an excuse for poorly organized or poorly run organization. And all day long, this has application in startup and entrepreneurship. It doesn't matter whether there's 6 people on the team, 36 or 360. It has application. And again, if done right, it shouldn't consistently change. I've seen it done right over and over again, and I've seen it last, just like I'm talking about. There's a quote, and I'm bad at recall from memory, but I believe it was John F. Kennedy talking about putting a man on the moon.
Hmm.
And when we're working inside the strategy realm, it's really easy for folks to get excited and say, let's put a man on the moon, right? That'd be cool. That's our strategy for 2026. But what they forget to add to that strategy is the second part, and that's let's get them home safely, right? So if we're thinking through our strategy work, and if we're talking about breakthrough and organization and all the things that come with strategy, we need to be thinking about putting a man on the moon, but not forgetting to get him home safely. And if we don't forget to get him home safely, we'll have a strategy and an org design that sticks for that year, for sure. And it doesn't matter how fast you're growing or how fast you're changing. If you do it right, it's been my experience that it sticks for a year, with very rare exceptions. And I think I've mentioned those rare exceptions on other podcasts with you guys, but
Hmm.
a rare exception might be radical change in government or policy or compliance or something of that nature that
Yeah.
that you couldn't have possibly seen coming, war that impacts your business directly.
Okay.
So I got
Uh,
one follow-up for that, Mike, if you don't mind.
I
So
don't mind at all.
I'm gonna butt in. Um, so Bill, in the a service-oriented business such as ours, or in let's say a construction business, you have your field technicians or field oversight. That's a pretty self-explanatory position on the org chart where, I've always had a bit of a challenge and, we kind of guessed and made changes as we went. The overhead roles that support the actual field work and business structure, is there a methodology or a way that you advise people to look at those roles and set minimums or financial targets as to when you actually really need that role versus the owner maybe taking that role on themselves?
Yeah, great question. So we should only be adding roles into the standard roles into the organization designer on the org chart, with two things in mind. One, they're required for financial growth, or two, financial growth requires the addition of the role, right? So it's all tied to the success of the organization. And in some cases, we need to bet on success, which means we have a plan. So it's not chance, it's risk. We understand we're betting that 4 months from now, a contract's going to close and we're going to need this person then, right? So the difference between chance and risk is quantified, right? So we're not going to just take a chance and staff a role. We're going to quantify the risk associated with staffing the role and then staff the role. Alternatively, we have growth in the organization requiring the role to come on board. But I think to answer your question, in growing organizations, especially small organizations, the the org chart is always made up of standard roles. I keep coming back to that. In growing organizations, it's common, not even common, likely that somebody's name will show up in two, three, or maybe four of those standard roles. So if Derek is the president and the leader, he may show up there 10% of the time, and then 30 or 40% of the time, Derek may show up as operations manager, right? And then Derek may show up as business development leader as well, 10%, or compliance guy, or what have you. So we call that full-time equivalency, and we want to schedule the full-time equivalency of the people that are filling multiple roles for a number of reasons. One is setting annual goals for that person. If they sit in 3 roles, well, we know that annual goals should be like 5 or less, and we could get into the details, psychology, et cetera, but let's just assume that to be true. So 5 or less annual goals for somebody on the team. If that person's sitting in 3 roles, those 5 goals need to be split up between those 3 roles, number one. Number two, that person's leader needs to know they are only acting in that department or that role X% of the time. And there needs to be some expectation that they're working with the other leader in the other parts of the business with this employee and their kind of transient moves between. And then number three, the people that work with that person also need to clearly understand that that person is 20% here, 30% there, 50% here, for example, so that their expectations of their peer, or if they're a subordinate of that person, their expectations of their manager are reasonable as well, knowing that they're filling kind of multiple roles. Of course, as the organization grows and as demands become more evident, then that person will kind of shrink back to two roles and then to one role, obviously. But that idea of full-time equivalency and that split in where they're focused is critically important early on in the growth phase of organizations, and I would argue necessary. I'll add something more to that maybe you guys have seen, but when organizations haven't gone through an organization design initiative, when they don't have a organization chart with standard roles, what we see to bridge this same gap is we'll see the manager of the kitchen, bathrooms, and baseball field, right? Like you'll be the manager of multiple things. You'll have ands in the title, right? That is a sure sign that you're building your organization around a person and not building an organization around standard roles. And that's the death of the organization or a large encumbrance to a successful growth.
That's so funny you say that, dude, because I totally did that. We have the vice president of web and print production.
Right.
And that's totally based around Kelsey.
Yep.
Like 100%. That is like just because of her skill set, what she's great at, what we need, like totally based around her.
Kelsey's a rock star, right? So she's going to show up as the vice president of web at 70% and the vice president of print or production, or whatever you said, at 30%. And not combine those two departments around Kelsey. So if we talk about doing organization design or organization charts, the first thing we do is we take all the names off the board, right? So the names are gone and the standard roles are developed and then organized in an organization chart in support of the strategy. Then we come back and play pin the tail on the donkey and see who fits where.
That is so funny. That is so funny. I'm guilty of all the wrong stuff.
You're not alone though. I mean,
no, we are too. And that's part of the reason I asked the question is, I plan over the next few weeks to sit down with our team and do that exact thing, pull it apart and remove the names.
Yeah, it's critical. And the other thing removing the names does too is it takes away the emotion, at least temporarily, so that people can think more clearly as they work together to do the work. Because we're all committed to our teams. We all want to support our teams. Our teams have supported us. And this organization design and org chart and the work we're talking about can be really burdened with emotions. And you can't think clear when you're burdened with emotions, right? So we need to make it as objective as possible, as long as possible in the process to get the best outcome.
Bill, I know one of the things we want to talk about today is functional accountabilities, and I feel like that may tie right into the standard roles and design of those. Can you kind of give us just a definition of functional accountabilities?
Yeah. So, well, I often joke that functional accountabilities are the secret decoder glasses for the org chart. So if I, quote, slap an org chart up on the wall, back in the day, I used to present on the wall, but if we put the org chart up on the TV in the conference room, and if we don't have functional accountabilities on the table in front of all the people viewing the org chart, we're ripe for conflict. So the functional accountabilities are the secret decoder glasses. It helps everybody see through the same lens and understand what they're seeing in the org chart. So what are they? Functional accountabilities we try and limit it to 3. On rare occasions, I'll stretch to 4. So my point is simple, typically 3 bullet points that outline the key responsibilities of that role. And another thing I commonly joke about with functional accountabilities is most of us have been at a Thanksgiving table or family dinner or visiting a friend's family, and somebody's grandma says, "Oh, Derek, what do you do at work every day?" Well, grandma, these 3 things, right? And grandma goes, "Oh, Derek, that's wonderful. I get it." So the functional accountabilities are the 3 or 4 things that most simply sum up what the person in that role does.
Okay. And so how is that used on a day-to-day basis?
Great. So the functional accountabilities sum up the key 3 things or 4 things that that standard role does, or the person filling that standard role is expected to do. The functional accountabilities are typically heavily aligned with how that person interacts with the other roles on the org chart. So on a job description, you may have a line that says, ultimately responsible for leading the new client onboarding process, right? You go back up to functional accountabilities and they're higher level on how that role interacts with the roles above it and below it. So you may see something like on the functional accountabilities, you may see something like accountable for understanding the annual strategy and translating that annual strategy into tactics that the team can make measurable success with, right? So, and one of those tactics is onboarding, which I just mentioned is on the JD. So the onboarding process is part of the JD, but at a higher level on the functional accountabilities, it just says, I'm a middle level manager, so I have to see and understand the vision and the strategy from the person above me. And I have to turn that into tactics, ways of executing so the people that report to me can be successful. One of those tactics is onboarding. I'll bet one maybe is offboarding. I don't know, right? So, and then you kind of build those details out.
Interesting. Um, I just had a thought too, and I lost it. And I know that we're gonna do a whole episode talking about job descriptions or what you call JDs, right? Uh, but I guess, as we kind of look to wrap up the main portion of this episode here, what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes that you see with people when they're setting up org charts or trying to relay functional accountabilities? I mean, I do have a couple of questions specifically around functional accountabilities, but
Sure. Yeah. So biggest mistakes. I think we've touched on the biggest one, and that is building the organization around the people you have today,
Mhm.
not building the organization around your vision, your goals, your strategy for the future. And that's the single biggest mistake that we see over and over and over again in the work that I do is building the organization around the people you have today. Like you said, Kelsey's a rock star, so suddenly she's the manager of 3 different things that are otherwise unrelated, right? So
Mhm.
that's the most common mistake. Um, the other common mistake, I think we kind of touched on this a little bit maybe the last time we talked as well, and that is that once teams start working with an organization chart and they start seeing the benefit of it, they now have this communication tool that they like, and they try and make it communicate a bunch of other things that maybe a different separate tool would be better for communicating. And I think that's a common mistake with a lot of tools, especially communication tools. Suddenly, the manager sees a little bit of traction, or the owner sees a little bit of traction. This org chart thing is really helping them think through stuff, helping them communicate to their team, set expectations, talk about escalation and communication and how it flows through the organization. And then suddenly they're like, well, what about, can we represent how we service the customer through the org? No, like that, there's a separate tool for that, right?
Mhm.
So I think the first mistake is building the organization chart around the people you have today, not around your goals, your objectives, and where you want to go. That's mistake number one. And then the second mistake is as soon as you start to build traction, this idea of trying to communicate lots of things through the org chart. Another common mistake is communicating cross-functional teams in the org chart. The org chart's a functional org chart, so functions only. We communicate cross-functional team charter in a different way as well, for example.
Okay. Question I have about functional accountabilities. And this is a question because I just did this and you gave me some feedback on it, where, I'm looking at functional accountabilities and I'm thinking about on these standardized roles of all the things that these people need to do. And so all of a sudden I've created a list of like 7 or 8 things as functional accountabilities. And the feedback you gave me was you need to make that list smaller, right? That it needs to be that 3 to 4 tops. How do you make the discernment of what should be considered a functional accountability and something is just a part of their duties and responsibilities?
Yeah. So First off, I think starting with a list like that is where everybody starts, right? And
Mhm.
I think that's important to start there and to kind of be exhaustive. And then once you have that kind of exhaustive, complete list of everything, it's to start to cook it back. And I think there's themes throughout that exhaustive list of 8, 10, 12, 15 things that will start to emerge. Um, if the person is in a leadership role, depending on where they are in the hierarchy, whether they're the president or somebody that reports the senior team or a manager or supervisor under the senior team, if you're in a leadership role, you have to understand where that role is in the hierarchy and then establish some common language for that role. So, for example, if somebody, as Derek mentioned on his team, he's got the folks out in the field doing the cleaning. The folks in the field doing the cleaning should not have any language in their functional accountabilities or their JD or their job title, standard role, that involves things like lead or manage. They are not leaders or managers. They are executors. They coordinate. They complete. They achieve measurable results. Um, Likewise, as the president or the senior team, you should also probably not have supervise or manage, right? It should be set vision, set direction, set strategy, communicate vision, that kind of thing. And
Mhm.
then in the middle manager component of it, it should be hearing the strategy or the vision and understanding it and converting it into how we execute or how we behave. And those are the tactics. So if we kind of look at that hierarchy and start to establish language in the different parts of that hierarchy of an org chart, we can then start to apply that language. And again, themes will kind of pop out.
Mhm.
And the themes are commonly around how that standard role relates to the standard roles adjacent to it, above it, and below it visually on the org chart. And I should add too, as I introduce the word hierarchy and the roles above and below, the org chart doesn't represent significance or importance to the organization, and it also doesn't represent compensation. Those are common mistakes as well. Really common mistakes. I probably should have mentioned when you asked that question is that people mistake the org chart for saying, well, that person is on the top of the org chart, so they're the most important and paid the most. That's not the case at all. Um, as we explore that more, an example I commonly come back to that actually I probably need a new example because not everybody I work with today remembers when the space shuttle blew up. I know we do.
Yeah.
But when the space shuttle blew up, it was an engineer that designed an O-ring or specified an O-ring that caused the explosion of the space shuttle. That engineer is an individual contributor, and they are represented visually on the bottom of the org chart, but pretty important.
Yeah.
Likewise, we'll have specialty scientists that are individual contributors that are, quote, on the bottom of the org chart that are oftentimes paid more than the person that leads them. So the org chart is not a representation of importance or compensation, and it's rather how we relate to each other to carry out the goals or the objective or the strategy of the business.
Yeah. I know I know we're gonna jump over to the Patreon side, but I just gotta say that hierarchy that you talk about with strategy at the top of how we do it, tactics, what's being done, and then execution, doing it, very helpful for me in looking at this org chart and defining roles and standardized roles and figuring out like, okay, because I would put someone in an org chart somewhere and then I realize that like they're not actually in charge of how we do it. They're actually in charge of what's being done, which means I need to reevaluate where I'm placing them in that org chart and how I'm looking at the whole thing. It's super, super helpful. And
Yeah.
I feel like it makes the org chart more usable and more predictive of that future state of what I'm trying to grow into over the course of the next year. So I love it. Absolutely
Yeah.
love it.
Well said. I'm glad you brought up that strategy, tactics, and execution component. We didn't talk about that earlier on the podcast, but you're absolutely right. It's great to hear you kind of recite it and use it. Um, yeah, critically important. That's what it's communicating is the expectations of success. And um, I know everyone's heard me say this before, but good people want to win. So as leaders, it's our job to position them and enable them to go win. And that first step is organization design, and that organization design is visualized in part on an org chart, in part with functional accountabilities. Again, the secret decoder glasses. So when we look at the org chart, we know what that standard role means because we know the 3 or 4 things that it's responsible for,
Yep.
as well as eventually job descriptions and a couple other small components too. Yeah.
Love it. That's a perfect, excuse me, that's a perfect spot for us to wrap up the main episode here. Folks, we're going to get into this a little bit more here on the Patreon side, so please hop on over. Bill, before we jettison this main episode here, how do people find you if they want to learn more, they're interested in working with you?
Thanks, Mike. So it's Bill at the OPEX, OPEX shop.com, or the failsafe is LinkedIn, and it's William and then parentheses Bill Tansey Jr. on LinkedIn.
Love it. Thanks everybody, of course, for listening. You can find this episode and the other episodes Bill's been on with us here over at our website, bluecollarstartup.io. Of course, you can listen to our episodes on Spotify, Apple, Rumble, and YouTube. Please make sure you give us a like, subscribe, share the show, send it to a friend. Appreciate all the support. Appreciate you listening, and you'll hear from us next week.
And that wraps up another episode of Blue Collar Startup. A big thank you to our sponsors, 5 Towers Media, Daigle Cleaning Systems, Daigle Fire Solutions, The Michaels Group, Martin Electric, MLB Construction, Bonaccio Construction, Peoplease, and Catamount Consulting for making this podcast possible. And thank you for tuning in. If you learned something or felt inspired, connect with us on our website at bluecollarstartup.io or email us at hardhat.bcsu@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your questions and topic ideas. Help us spread the word by sharing the show and following us on social media for updates. Until next time, keep on building, keep on dreaming, and keep hustling like your future depends on it.